Before he passed, Robert Mitchum finally revealed the love of his life. Here's something most people don't know about one of Hollywood's coldest-looking leading men. For most of his adult life, he stayed emotionally tied to one woman he'd met long before anyone knew his name. To the movie-going public, Robert Mitchum never seemed like a man who could be vulnerable. He came across as dangerous, worn down, unbothered. The heavy-lidded eyes and unhurried voice made him feel less like a polished star and more like a man who'd already seen too much of life to care what anyone thought of him. That persona made him one of the most recognizable faces in classic American film. Women wanted him. Men respected him. Studios built entire pictures around a magnetism he never seemed to work for. But the real Robert Mitchum was always messier than the legend. Decades of headlines tied his name to arrests, affairs, and Hollywood nightlife, yet one relationship outlasted every scandal. It began before movie premieres, before film noir made him a legend, before America turned him into a symbol of rebellious masculinity. Her name was Dorothy Mitchum, and unlike the rest of Hollywood, she'd known him before the act ever started. She knew him before the tailored suits, before the press junkets, before the cigarettes and dry wit became part of the public character the country fell for. She'd met the angry, broken man from the Depression, still carrying childhood wounds, always seeming to be at odds with authority, stability, and often himself. That version of him rarely showed up in public, but Dorothy lived alongside him for decades. As fame swelled through the 40s and 50s, his on-screen image grew only more imposing. Out of the Past made him the face of noir cool. The Night of the Hunter gave him a nearly frightening intensity. The studios sold him as the man no woman could ever truly hold on to. Maybe that was even a little true. Mitchum himself later admitted he hadn't always been an easy man to be married to. Fame brought constant temptation. Rumors trailed him everywhere. From the outside, his private life sometimes looked like it was falling apart, and yet, through all of it, Dorothy stayed at the center of his life. People close to him found that remarkable, because Mitchum trusted almost no one, not reporters, not studio heads, not the industry itself. He treated celebrity with open disdain. But something in him relaxed around Dorothy. Friends noticed he grew quieter, less defended, less committed to acting untouchable. That contrast only sharpened as he aged. The rebellious outsider slowly turned into an older man, taking a more honest look at his own life. In later interviews, whenever her name came up, the sarcasm would drop away for a moment, replaced by something like recognition. That after a life built on illusion, the one thing that had always been real had been there from the start. Mitchum was born in 1917 in Bridgeport, Connecticut, into instability. He was too young to understand. His father worked the railroads, trying to hold together a growing family through hard economic years. Then tragedy hit. His father died in a railroad accident while Mitchum was still a boy, leaving the household without its anchor. That early loss stayed with him. People who knew him later often noticed a quiet sadness behind the tough exterior, as if he expected to be let down by the world before it even had a chance to try. His mother moved the family from town to town looking for stability, and Mitchum came of age during the Depression, surrounded by hardship and uncertainty. He got into fights, clashed with authority, and drifted between odd jobs. By his teens, he looked far more likely to disappear into obscurity than to become a movie star. And that outcome wouldn't have surprised him. Before Hollywood ever noticed him, he worked as a ditch digger, railroad hand, a boxer, songwriter, a machine operator, whatever paid enough to get through another week. Some nights he had nowhere fixed to sleep. Other nights, he just kept moving. Then he met Dorothy Spence. She met him before any of the myth existed, before America knew his name, before women across the country would fantasize about the sleepy-eyed actor with the dangerous voice. What Dorothy encountered was rawer than that. A tall, restless young man with real scars and no money. She stayed anyway. That mattered to him more than he ever comfortably said out loud. Part of why their marriage lasted is that Dorothy never fell for Robert Mitchum, the star. That man didn't exist yet. She knew Bob, the drifter from hard times. Still unsure whether life would ever get easier. They married in 1940. with no guarantee he'd ever amount to anything in an industry full of hopefuls who never got their break. They started a family before fame arrived, before the interviews, before the scandals, before the country tried to figure out what made him different from every other leading man. That history is likely why Dorothy stayed emotionally central to him in a way nothing else ever quite matched. She was proof someone had loved him before loving him became fashionable. Years later, as one of the most desired men in Hollywood, some part of him still carried the memory of the broke young man from the Depression, who once had nothing but a woman willing to stick around. By the mid-1940s, Mitchum was no longer just another actor hoping for a break. Hollywood realized he was something different. Most leading men of the era performed confidence, sharp delivery, polished smiles, total control. Mitchum did the opposite. He looked tired, detached, almost indifferent, and audiences couldn't look away. Out of the past made him one of the defining faces of film noir. He didn't need big speeches. A single look from him carried more than pages of dialogue from other actors. Women read danger into him. Men read authenticity. Directors realized exhaustion could be made magnetic. The studios leaned into it, selling him as the emotionally unreachable fantasy, a man impossible to fully hold, which only deepened the audience's fascination. Magazine covers piled up, interviews multiplied, and by the 1950s, he was one of the biggest stars in the country. Through it all, Dorothy mostly stayed out of the spotlight. That mattered. Unlike many Hollywood wives who embraced the celebrity machine, she reportedly wanted little to do with it. She wasn't chasing attention, and people close to the couple later said she guarded their private life fiercely, understanding how easily fame could corrode a marriage. Meanwhile, Mitchum grew more openly cynical about the industry as his fame grew. He gave sarcastic interviews and treated his own success like an accident rather than an achievement, a stance that only deepened his mystique. But privately, the pressure of fame was building. Actresses flirted openly. Tabloids linked his name to rumors nearly every year. For many men, that kind of attention becomes its own addiction. And Mitchum was honest enough, later on, to admit he wasn't perfect. Still, something about Dorothy stayed different from everyone else around him. She'd known him before Hollywood did, which, for a star of his era, meant everything. Fame warps how people treat you. Eventually, most stars lose track of who actually sees them as a person rather than an opportunity. Dorothy never treated him like a myth, and the bigger he got publicly, the more valuable that plain normalcy became behind closed doors. Then came the scandal that almost ended everything. In 1948, Mitchum was arrested for marijuana possession alongside actress Leela Leeds. In today's news cycle, a celebrity arrest fades within days. In the 1940s studio system, it was closer to catastrophe. The industry carefully built clean public images for its leading men, and an arrest like this threatened to unravel his entire career. Newspapers ran with it as national entertainment, casting him as Hollywood's newest dangerous figure. Studio executives worried it would end. Mitchum's reaction was near total indifference. He refused to play the part of the ashamed celebrity that the studios wanted, at one point joking that prison was a bit like Palm Springs, minus the riffraff. Executives were horrified. Audiences, if anything, were more captivated. The scandal only reinforced the exact image people already had of him: dangerous, uncontrollable, unapologetic. But behind the headlines, Dorothy was left to absorb the real cost of being married to the country's most notorious star. That part of the story tends to get left out. Scandal rarely touches only the celebrity. Families quietly absorb the fallout while the press chases the story. Dorothy was suddenly at the center of a national spectacle she'd never asked for. Photographers trailed the family. Gossip columns speculated endlessly about whether the marriage was collapsing. There were probably moments it nearly did. For decades afterward, rumors about other women never fully went away. Co-stars admitted their attraction to him. Journalists linked him to affairs, nightlife, and emotional distance. His reputation as Hollywood's untamable anti-hero grew so strong that people almost expected recklessness from him, and yet, through all of it, Dorothy stayed emotionally central in a way people around him kept noticing. Friends described her as the only person who could speak to him without performance or fear. Around most people, Mitchum kept up layers of sarcasm and distance. Around her, those defenses reportedly eased. She could challenge him without being intimidated by his fame, because she remembered exactly who he was before any of it started. Maybe he needed that more than he ever let on. Underneath the cool exterior, there was always a thread of loneliness. The drinking, the restlessness, the emotional distance that often marks men trying to outrun something they never fully resolved. Dorothy didn't fix that in him, but she remained the one constant through every destructive cycle. Hollywood wanted the fantasy version of Robert Mitchum. Dorothy stayed with Bob, the actual person. By the 1970s, Mitchum had outlasted most of the version of Hollywood masculinity he once defined. The industry was shifting toward younger actors with a more openly emotional style, and the old studio system that had made him a star was fading. Mitchum never bent to fit the new mold, and that refusal became part of his legend. Younger actors respected him as a link to something the industry was losing. Someone who felt genuinely real in a business now performing off-screen as much as on it, but privately. Age was wearing down the armor he'd carried for decades. Friends noticed he'd grown more reflective in interviews. The sarcasm stayed, but there was a fatigue underneath it. Now, years of smoking, drinking, and hard living had taken a visible toll. His face still held power on screen, but there was a quieter sadness in it too. The kind that comes with counting how much time is left rather than how much lies ahead. Dorothy mattered even more during these years. By then, the two of them had outlasted more than most marriages do across several lifetimes. Fame, the temptation, public humiliation, long separations for film shoots, endless gossip, sheer exhaustion. Whole eras of American culture had shifted around them, and somehow the marriage was still standing. Not perfect, standing. That distinction meant something to him. Part of why people still connect with their story, that it never feels staged. He never pretended to be an ideal husband. She never pretended fame hadn't complicated things between them. There was real damage in the marriage at times, real pain, but also enough shared history to carry them through it. And that history only grew more valuable to him as he aged. Reporters later noticed something shift in his tone whenever Dorothy came up in conversation. His voice would slow, the cynicism would soften, and for a moment, he'd sound less like the icon and more like an old man quietly acknowledging the one person who'd witnessed the entire arc of his life. The broke Depression-era kid, the angry young drifter, the rising actor, the scandal-ridden star, the aging survivor watching his generation disappear. Dorothy had seen every version of him. That kind of closeness becomes rare for famous people once enough years pass. Many spend so long being watched that they forget what it feels like to simply be known. Dorothy still knew him, and maybe that's why, near the end of his life, Mitchum kept returning to the same realization. After all the fame, the women, the films, and the applause, the one relationship that felt permanent had begun before any of it did. In his final years, Mitchum pulled further away from the industry that had spent decades turning him into a legend, settling into a quiet life in Santa Barbara, California. Far from premieres and studio politics he'd never fully trusted anyway. By then, decades of hard living had taken their toll. Heavy smoking had weakened him, age had slowed him down, and beneath the familiar toughness in his voice, there was now real fragility. The rebel of American cinema was becoming an old man facing the fact that even legends run out of time. One by one, the people from the Hollywood he'd known, directors, co-stars, friends, rivals began to disappear. That loss affected him more than he usually let on. Detachment gets harder to maintain when the people who shared your memories are no longer around to remember them with you. Dorothy remained, and in those quieter years, the difference between fleeting relationships and something lasting became impossible for him to ignore. Hollywood had surrounded him with beauty and temptation for decades, rewarding illusion at every turn. But age has a way of revealing which relationships were built on fantasy and which were built on simply enduring. Dorothy had endured all of it, not because the marriage was flawless. It wasn't. And Mitchum knew that better than anyone. But across 50 years of chaos, they'd built something sturdier than glamour, familiarity, loyalty, and shared survival. The kind of bond that only forms when two people see each other through every stage of life, not just the good years. People close to him described his final years as ink